Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people in their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching.
Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And I'm glad to be with you again today. And I have a set of topics I'd like to chat with you about that I think will be interesting and informative to you. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. I'll tell you about the show in a minute. And for all of those of you who are regular listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. It's really it's a pleasure to have you all back, and want to thank those of you that commented on last week's show. I got some nice feedback about the conversation I had about leadership and the Super Bowl, the kind of amazing feats that were accomplished during that time for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who were led by what many people consider to be one of the greatest of all time quarterbacks, Tom Brady. And it was interesting to think about Tom not as an amazing athlete, but as an amazing leader. And I also talked a lot about Governor Ned Lamont in Connecticut, about the rollout of the vaccinations and how successful Connecticut has been, and some of the choices the governor had made that I thought were really well done. And while I know there's a lot of anger with all the groups that didn't get their vaccinations as quick as they would have hoped, I do think the governor has done a really remarkable job under very challenging and difficult circumstances. But this week's show, I'd like to talk a little bit about a group of other topics that are pressing, that are important, and that are relevant in today's world. And again, I'll tell you a little bit about the show. The show is called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And it's all about the idea that we have this science that's emerged since the late 1990s, early 2000s, called emotional intelligence. I'm considered an expert in the field, an expert at applying the science of emotional intelligence. So one of the things that I've done over the years was to create this talk show, and WPKN has been kind enough to host it. And you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio in Bridgeport, Connecticut, broadcasting in Bridgeport for quite a few years now. This is a community radio station that depends on your support. So whatever support you can provide, it's great. And I'm also very thankful to PKN for hosting this show, because a number of years ago, one of my colleagues at the radio station asked if I'd be willing to come in and answer people's questions. People would call in the past times when I broadcasted from the actual studio, and they would call in with questions that I would answer as best I could using this concept I call an emotion roadmap. Because what I found over the years is that when smart people are stuck, and I consider all of you listening to my show to be smart people, that good critical thinkers, excellent problem solvers, when you're stuck, it's almost always because something emotional is happening inside you, or you're worried about the emotions in somebody else. That's important to what you're trying to get done. So I had this show in the studio, and people would call in pretty regularly. Now, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to go to the studio in recent times, although I think that's going to change in the not too distant future. As part of the vaccination process, I'm scheduled to get my second shot, and I'm very excited about that. And that means I'll be able to go more places, do more things, be with more people. So it still may be a while before I want to come into the studio. And so I'm doing shows from my home studio, and I'm broadcasting to you, sometimes with guest speakers. And I'm delighted to tell you about a guest I'm going to have up and coming soon. But today's show, I'm going to be talking with you about some of the just thoughts I've had about challenging emotional situations that exist in our country today. So one of the things that has challenged many of us in recent times is this whole notion of election fraud. Many people feel as though the election fraud ideas were fraudulent themselves, that there was no election fraud, and that even to talk about it is dangerous because it just fuels the flames of those who do believe there was such a thing as an election fraud. So where does truth lie? Now, I'm not going to tell you I know where the truth is. I don't know what happened in every state, and every locale, and every district. I can't say if there was fraud someplace or not. I can speculate and say that I think in most elections there's some fraud in various places, but not enough necessarily to change the election outcome. But again, I'm no expert in this area. But what I am interested in and what I am an expert in is to be able to talk a little bit about what if you believe that there was election fraud, and what if you are very friendly or related to someone who thinks that you're insane to think that, and you think that they've got their head in the sand not to believe that. What about when you have relationship issues, where the work that I do is all about relationship issues, and how do we listen and understand when someone has such a diverse viewpoint than our own without getting upset? How do we do that? How does that happen? So I'd like to talk a bit about that today and some interesting work that's being done in that area. I also have recently read a few articles in the Harvard Business Review, and I find Harvard Business Review to be one of the best journals for staying up to date on really innovative ideas. It isn't just for business and industry, although that's where it leans mostly, but it's also for any leader in any aspect of life, whether it's in a school, in the military, in the government, nonprofit of some kind. It's really all about ideas and research, and just lots of really interesting authors and articles, I find. And a couple of them I'd like to talk to you about a bit today. One's on feedback, because around this time of year, there are people getting information about whether or not they are getting a merit increase if you're lucky enough to be working, and also whether or not your company has decided they're not giving any increases this year, or that the pool of money that they did have, they had a little bit of pool of money, and you got on average what everybody got, or you're going to get more than anybody else because they thought you did such a great job, or you're on the lower end thinking that, no, we're going to not give you as much as the average because while others seem to have done more than you were able to do this year for whatever reason. Anyway, this is a time when people talk about money and raises and feedback, and there's also a time in the fall that happens as well, but it will often take place by March in the following year, for last year for some reason. Anyway, I want to talk a bit about giving feedback and just a really interesting and innovative way that bosses or leaders or managers or supervisors can do that. I want to offer you some insights into that area. And then what I consider to be a very disappointing article about what's really holding women back was an article that was written several months ago in the Harvard Business Review, and kind of hard to believe, but it's some of the same stuff that's been holding women back in particular, from the top echelon in industry and other places. What's holding them back? I'll share with you what the authors discovered, why it's a bit disappointing, and also what you might be able to do about it. Okay. And then I want to tell you about a guest speaker I have coming up, a woman named Deborah Tannen. And you all might remember the Dolly Parton movie. It wasn't just Dolly Parton, but she's like one of my favorite stars. And she was in a movie called 9 to 5, Working 9 to 5. But there's also a book written about 9 to 5. And it was written by a woman named Deborah Tannen. And you can look her up, Tannen. And she's a brilliant writer, and she's written several books that I have found just really amazing to read. And she's agreed to be a guest speaker on my show. And so that'll be coming up, and I'll tell you a bit about her. And so that's sort of where the show's going today. Let me just check. I think I've covered pretty much what I want to cover with you. I do want to talk a little bit first now about this topic about election fraud. Now, when I say election fraud, I'm thinking about this idea that Donald Trump believed that the election was stolen from him. Now, you might say he didn't really believe that. He just said that because if you're not a Trump fan, that's probably what you'd think and feel and believe to be true. If you are a Donald Trump fan, and by the way, the country's pretty evenly split, right? I mean, there was, I think, 75 million some votes for President Biden and about 74 million some votes for Donald Trump. That's pretty well split, right? I mean, we're only 360, 70 million people, so pretty much all those that voted were either, it's pretty clear that we don't agree because they're pretty different policies, pretty different visions for the country. Obviously, a lot of changes since President Biden has taken over. I imagine that those of you who voted for President Biden are pretty happy with many, if not all, of the choices that President Biden has chosen to do with executive orders. And those of you that voted for President Trump, I imagine, are very sad and upset by some of the changes that President Biden is making. That's what happens in a democracy. But the idea of election fraud, that's a major concern. And it's a major concern in this way. If you truly believe that the election was stolen, then you feel like there's been an injustice, a major consequence, and it undermines our feelings of living in a free and safe democracy. If you think that it's crazy to believe that the election was stolen, you wonder, how can people possibly think that when every court in the land ignored any evidence that President Trump's lawyers put in front of them and said, there's not enough here to justify any legal proceedings. And so why wouldn't you believe that? Especially since some of the judges, I guess, were appointees during the Trump administration. So it seems like there was no election fraud, but then there was seemingly evidence of situations in different places where people who typically are supposed to be allowed in to watch polls were not, where state election laws were changed at the last minute. There was a number of things that didn't sound right either. So what was the truth? Now, I'm not someone that's going to tell you I know what the truth was, because I certainly don't. I have my opinions like you have your opinions. And so can we talk about our opinions? I don't think so. Not in today's world, right? We start talking about our opinions, and if we don't share the same opinions with the person we're talking to, pretty soon we're mad at each other is what's happening. And maybe not talking to each other after that. So one of the groups that I've been doing a bunch of work with is a group called Braver Angels. Now, if you've heard my show, you know that sometimes I go into the political end, not because I want you to choose one side or another, because that's not what my show's about at all. But it's because I'm so concerned that this partisanship in our country is pulling us apart. And my show is about generating internal peace, because you've learned how to use my emotion roadmap to handle your own internal emotions more effectively, more successfully. That doesn't mean repressing emotions. That just means dealing openly and honestly with what you're feeling in constructive ways. So I'm trying to help people to do that. And so I found an organization, Braver Angels, that is really helping people who are very diverse in their viewpoints, particularly about politics, come together and listen to understand. Not listen to agree. That's different. But listen to understand why someone might have a different point of view than yours. Doesn't that sound like a reasonable goal? And almost everybody, if you're not associating with any particular topic, Of course, that sounds reasonable. Why wouldn't we listen to one another when we disagree, especially if we respect, care for, care about, and even love the other person who's talking to us? And yet, what if their viewpoint is so different than mine? What if they really like President Trump and I hate President Trump, or vice versa? How can I listen to that? That's so crazy. I mean, that's sort of where we are as a country, right? And so how do we do it differently? So Brave Angels got this whole concept. And if you listen to my shows, you heard me talk to a fellow named John Wood Jr., who is the national ambassador for No Label for Brave Angels, and John Wood is an incredible guy, really neat person to talk to. Has quite an interesting life story, and he described in the interview I did with him on my radio show that Brave Angels uses Martin Luther King's philosophy and also marital counseling techniques. Combine those to put together so that we can talk better to each other for understanding others' points of view. And they've had some tremendous success bringing people together who, again, may be a fan of the former presidents and someone who really intensely disliked, if not hated, the former president. And yet people could talk to each other. And not just about the President Trump scenario, but also about just if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You might have very different points of view about what this country should or shouldn't be doing. So again, I focus sort of on the politics in recent times, not because I want to necessarily. It's just that's kind of where we are as a country, where emotions are running really high. And I'd like to lower the emotional temperature if I could through the work that I'm doing. And so again, thank you for listening. And I hope this helps with your own personal situations in life. So one of the things that was very controversial recently was that Brave Angels decided to have on several speakers representing the different points of view that one, there was election fraud, and two, that there was absolutely no evidence of election fraud, but there was some voter suppression. So if you're understanding the concept of voter suppression, people really are concerned that over the years, there have been efforts made to keep certain populations, parts of our population, from voting. And is there evidence of that? Seems to be fairly, the fair amount of evidence that says that that has happened at times, absolutely. In perhaps many places. I can't say how many and where it's happened, but it seems pretty clear that it's happened. Was there voter fraud? Same thing. Seems like it's happened in places, probably many different places. And has it happened in our last elections? I'm sure to some degree it has. Again, where and how much, who knows? I mean, I guess some people think they know, and perhaps some people really are expert in this area and do know. I haven't been convinced that anybody's really got the truth, if you will, on any of this. Which again, for those of you who think there is absolute truth out there, I'm sure you don't agree with me. You just think I'm clueless if I don't believe that one of those things is truthful. So, having said all that, Brave Angels decided we're going to take and put this up as a debate, and we're going to invite lots of people. I think they said, and they've had thousands on their broadcast, on Zoom broadcast, where they've done these kinds of talks. And I guess they had thousands, or I guess the highest number of people ever attended. And there was tremendous pushback because the people that didn't like what they heard about one side or the other complained bitterly that Brave Angels talked about. In fact, some people felt that Brave Angels never should have even brought this up, that the topic never should be addressed, that there could be two sides to this story. Now, here's something where I hope you agree with me in that I think nothing should be off the table in terms of being talked about. And because I think something's crazy that you believe is true, or you think something's crazy that I believe is true, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some way for us to talk about it without just being mad and totally hostile with one another. And so they thought They waited. They thought this is such an emotional topic. Should we even talk about it? And they said, of course we should. That's our mission. Their mission is to allow people who have very different viewpoints to be able to talk about them, to have a dialogue, not a running monologue where just people are just waiting. You watch a lot of these TV shows at night on some of the cable channels, and they're on dialogues there. They're just people kind of waiting for the other person to finish, not always, but sometimes waiting for the other person to finish, just so they can shout about their point of view and why the other person's so wrong. No, what Braver Angels tries to do is to create a dialogue that is about people saying what they believe is true, why they believe it's true, how they came to that determination, and other people speaking their mind, commenting, asking questions, but also going through the same type of journey about their perspective. Now, why is that a bad thing? Why can't we talk to each other anymore? I used to enjoy talking politics with people, but I don't so much anymore because people get so hostile about it. And because most of us aren't really experts, but we have opinions, and their opinions are shaped. But they're not shaped just because we read a newspaper, or when I was growing up, there was like an hour of news a night. That was it. You'd get a newspaper, one newspaper, or maybe a couple newspapers a day you might read. And then during the day, you'd hear like 5-10 minutes of news at the top of the hour. And that's pretty much it. But now there's a whole industry dedicated to keeping the flames raging around different viewpoints, attracting an audience. And then as you, especially with social media, for instance, click on something that sounds interesting to you, and you click to read more, and all of a sudden it shows you like 2 or 3 articles that are similar, that have a similar point of view, and you click on those, and pretty soon your Facebook account, your Twitter account, Instagram account, whatever it might be, is sort of targeted for the kind of clicks that you've already made, promoting not only more of the same, but combining it with advertisements. And you've all seen this probably, where you've clicked on something where you're interested in an ad. If you might be interested in buying a new pair of running shoes, or maybe some kind of food, or some kind of beverage, and you click on whatever you might click on, and then it'll show it to you nonstop for weeks in a row, where it keeps going. You might like this, Amazon says, and you might like that because you clicked on. And it's sort of they're called algorithms. They channel all kinds of information that keeps you coming back, because the more clicks they get, the more they get advertising revenues. I mean, it's money's driving a lot of what happens to us. I mean, we're a capitalist society. I get that, and that's a good thing. But I think one of the things that I love about a newspaper in your hand, and you can do this online, I just don't. A newspaper in my hand, I like to read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Hartford Courant, and the Boston Globe. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and so I don't read every paper every day, but I like to read different papers. And one of the things I find is that when I have a paper in my hand, I will go through, on a day that I have a lot of time, not every day I get to do this, but I like to go through page after page and see things that I wouldn't necessarily click on online to read, but something catches my eye. Something in Egypt happened, and all of a sudden I'm reading about it, and I never would have looked for that, but it's interesting to me what they wrote about Egypt. Or something's happening, in Thailand that I wouldn't have known about, or a new discovery in the Amazon that I wouldn't necessarily have known about. So when you don't have the algorithms driving what they think you want to see more of, you get to see lots of different things when you hold in your hand a newspaper. But most of the people I know, my children, all adults, none of them get a newspaper. Everything they do is online, as far as news and reporting and so forth. I mean, they read newspapers online, they just don't get one. So we're kind of influenced by where we might start, but we get inundated with it until at some point we believe what we're reading has to be true. All this information, all these sources keep telling me my beliefs are true and yours aren't. How do you have a dialogue when you're constantly overloaded with information that reinforces only the point of view that you started with? How do you be open to other people's points of view? I started watching, I listen to NPR, but I also listen to Fox News. I listen to MSNBC, CNN. I like the Wall Street Journal when Wall Street Journal Week is on. And so I get different points of view, but it's so different on one station than it is on another station. But I try to have some balance in the way I look at life. And so I don't want to be influenced by only one channel or one newspaper or one news source. What are your habits? Are they worth revisiting at all? Do you only look at one place for your ideas? Are you so convinced that everything on the one channel you listen to night in, night out is the truth? And do you second guess anything? I'm kind of interested in what's happening in politics again. I pay attention to that. And so President Trump's behavior, a lot of people felt he was a bully and they hated him for it. At the same time, I view Governor Cuomo's behavior, and so do quite a few others apparently, as he's a bully too. Isn't he? But what if you're a Republican? Do you still think Cuomo's a bully? I mean, a Democrat, and you think Cuomo's a bully? I mean, sometimes you only see the other party or the other group as doing something wrong. What's that about? It's about what are we saying to ourselves. See, I think that the way we change who we are to be more open, to be more accepting of viewpoints different than our own, is to allow ourselves to suspend judgment. I was trained as a therapist years ago, and one of the things you learn is you got to be non-judgmental in order to be able to help somebody. If you listen to somebody's story and you just say, "What a jerk you are. Man, how could you do that? Why would you do that? What's wrong with you?" Do you think you can be helpful when you're thinking like that? How do you be helpful to one another so that you can have conversations that are real? How do you do it? Well, when Braver Angels, as I said, hosted this event, they got tremendous pushback. And after the pushback, they lost some members. Some people just said, "I can't believe you even talked about election fraud. That's such a disservice. I can't believe I ever valued your organization. I'm out of here." Now, at the same time they lost members, they actually gained a lot of members who felt like this was not necessarily truth as we know it. There were some facts maybe that weren't quite correct, I guess, for some of the people that were presenters that were part of it. I guess there was some concern about that. But John Wood Jr., this fellow that I interviewed, I think the world of, he basically wrote a wonderful response. He said, if we didn't talk about this, if we didn't have this on our agenda, who are we? Why would we be afraid of something that was extremely controversial? That's what we've been doing. That's what our mission is. I'm sorry we lost people. I'm sorry people left. I'm thrilled that more people joined. But this is what we do. We bring people together to hear different viewpoints, to try to help them to understand that other viewpoints different than their own can be acceptable too. It may even be right. It may even be right. But we're not saying one viewpoint is right or the other is right. We're saying, hey, we need to listen better to each other. I thought it was a great response. I encourage you to listen more to Braver Angels. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. March 22nd, there's a group of us, volunteer citizens, just like all of you listening, for the most part, are citizens who have some stake in what happens in our country, who care about what happens in our country. And sometimes you feel a little bit helpless about what you're doing to influence what goes on in our country. Well, there's a group of us that feel like we can make a difference. And so Some people, myself and some others who work with No Labels, No Labels is another organization you've heard me talk about here. They work directly with elected officials, and they're very strong in encouraging people to be very bipartisan, to work across the aisle, to pick the best ideas that represent what's in the best interest of our country, to pick those ideas over what the party may want you to do. Think about that for a second. Sometimes what's best for the country and the constituents in your district or in your state, if you're a senator, conflict with what your party wants you to do. But if you want to be reelected, your party is your best source for support, for funding, for labor, for marketing, for promotion, for campaigning. So if you go against your party, maybe once is okay, twice even, but if you actually just keep doing what's right for the country and it's not what your party's advocating, they won't support you. Next primary, they won't help you. So there's a lot of disincentive to do what's right because it may mean that you can't get something for your district because your party won't support you. And you won't get reelected because your party won't help you. It takes a lot of courage to be a politician that really acts like a statesman or a stateswoman, where you're doing what's right all the time for the right reasons, in the right way, at the right time. So No Labels supports getting people in office who are bipartisan most of the time, if not all the time, in the way that they act. So I've been very active in that group, and we've combined efforts with some volunteers with this Braver Angels organization that is all about all of us as citizens being able to listen to each other, especially when we disagree. And we have joined together to present a program. I hope you all want to sign up for it. I can tell you what, if you write to me, I can send you the link so that you can register, because you'll have to register in order to get on. You can write to me at my email, which is cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com, and just write that you're interested in the Braver Angel No Labels meeting, March 22nd. It's going to be from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we have two moderators who are great. John Wood Jr. that I just told you about, the National Ambassador for Braver Angels, and Ryan Clancy, who's a strategic advisor for No Labels and somebody that's been in and out of politics. I mean, he is someone that has worked for the Obama administration and the Biden campaign, but he is a No Labels guy. I mean, he really is very supportive of this whole philosophy of people being bipartisan. And he's extremely knowledgeable about the machinations in terms of how politics really works, how to get a bill passed. And he and John Wood from Braver Angels will be the two moderators, and our two guests that will be answering the questions from an insider perspective about how citizens can influence what goes on in our congressional offices in DC. And the two people we have are Brian Fitzpatrick, who is the vice chairman of the No Labels group, and he is from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And there's a bipartisan index. The Lugar Bipartisan Index is something that measures each congressperson's ability as to be bipartisan. They have some criteria. I wouldn't say it's a perfect measure of bipartisanship, but it's the only legitimate one out there that we know about. And out of 433 representatives, there's 435. They don't rate the speaker like Speaker Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the House for the Republicans. Those two don't get rated, but everybody else does. So 433 representatives, and Brian Fitzpatrick is number one on that list. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And Elaine Luria, his counterpart, is going to be, so Brian, by the way, is a moderate Republican in Bucks County. And Elaine Laurier is a Democrat in Virginia, and she's also part of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And they're both really bipartisan oriented, and they're going to talk about how each of us can influence, how they are influenced, what type of communications are meaningful to them. And it won't be the same for everybody, but you can at least get some ideas about how to influence people in those roles. And we've one of the groups I'm in No Labels that I lead has spent a lot of time with Brian Fitzpatrick, and so we've gotten to know him. And I wish more and more people were like him, in the sense that he really fights to do the right thing for the country. He really does, and it's so nice to be able to support him. And even though I live in Connecticut, I work very hard on his campaign to help him get reelected. One of the things we find is that sometimes our own elected officials are not bipartisan, and I don't want to support people who aren't bipartisan. That's the way I feel. I don't care if you vote the way I want you to vote. I care if you vote the way the country needs you to vote, in terms of you studying the issues, spending time thinking about what's right for the country and for your constituents, and then doing the right thing. If you're showing up like that, then I want to support you. And you don't have to support the bills that I care about and vote the way I want you to. I just want you to have the best possible attitude, the statesman-like attitude, I think, that the original founding fathers wanted for everybody that went to Congress. It wasn't supposed to be a career. It was supposed to be, you went, you did the right thing for your country for a few years, and then you went home. So anyway, that's another story. But I do think that this is going to be a great evening, where they're going to talk again. John Wood and then Ryan Clancy are going to be the two moderators. I'm going to be asking them questions specifically focused on what can citizens do to influence how politicians, elected officials vote, and also on influencing the type of legislation that gets put in front of them and gets talked about and voted on and passed. How do we do more so we feel consequential, that we can make a difference? And this is, by the way, this is one of the things I'm excited about. Is this did not come from the Bravery Angels leadership or the No Labels leadership. This came from a group of volunteers. The fellow in New York who started it for No Labels, a fellow named Ron Tobias, has become a good friend of mine. And Ron has worked diligently, and a bunch of us from the No Labels volunteers have worked with him. And then with a group from Bravery Angels, who are in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And there's a group there. I really don't know who the leader is there, so I won't say. But we just all work together. It really isn't so much about a leader as just a bunch of us wanted to make this happen. And we got the representatives to come and be part of it, and we're excited about that. And then if you stay on after the representatives are finished from 7 to 8, at 8:15, from 8 to 8:15, you're going to be able to ask about No Labels and Bravery Angels. And I hope you want to join with us. I hope you decide that you are tired of just sitting on the sidelines, feeling like you can't do something where you make a difference, and you want to join with one or both organizations where you can make a difference. So maybe you'll do that with us. I hope so. That's March 22nd. Again, if you want the invitation, happy to invite you, and just email me, cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. I hope you get to come to it. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight. I also wanted to talk about what is it about our communication that makes this so hard. Now, you could say that President Trump fanned the flames. You could say, if we're a President Trump fan, that he never had a chance. He never had a honeymoon. The Russia collusion story, all that was happening even before he ever stepped into the office. And so the reason he was combative, although that's his style anyway, I believe, but he was partly combative because people attacked him from the second he stepped into the office. Wherever you come down on that, it's interesting, but it didn't start with President Trump, because when President Obama was in office, the divisiveness was still out there and was still happening. Maybe not to the same degree, but it was out there. And when George Bush was in office, this has been going on for quite some time. When Bill Clinton even was there, so it's been happening more and more and more. And there's lots of reasons for it, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. I believe that we can all influence our surroundings, our environment, City Hall. I don't, not someone who goes quietly into the night. So I do think we can have more influence perhaps than we think, than we believe. And so a bunch of us are making that happen, and hope you enjoy it and be a part of it. Now, I wanted to tell you that one of my guests coming on is a woman named Deborah Tannen. And Deborah Tannen, I actually used to, in my role in the world outside of the volunteer work I do on the radio, I'm a leadership consultant. I've done training and consulting with large organizations, small organizations. I've worked closely with a number of different entities in government and in the military, as well as with many large companies that you'll know all the names if I share them. But my point is that, having said that, one of the things that happens is there's some conversational types that are typical to different genders. And I want to just share some of the things that I learned I've used this before, and it's really intriguing. It's like how men and women are different. Not every man and not every woman. So don't assume that when I say this, it's going to be that I'm saying all women, all men do certain things. That's not true. But is there some things we can learn about the way people communicate that are useful? Let me share an example or two. So, in your household, this may or may not be true, because a lot of we're learning a lot about gender these days that we didn't really understand very much of before. So the whole transgender, that's a whole nother issue, right? About what's happening with our kids and whether or not they see themselves as their biological selves or they see themselves as something different. What is that all about? What does it mean? And so forth. But are there some general tendencies about gender? Yes, there are, I believe. So here's an example. So let's assume that certain people, as women, not every woman, but as many women, are less direct in their language than men are. Now, what does that mean in real life? If you're in your home and you're a couple, a man and a woman, and the woman says, "Would you like to go to the movies with me tonight?" Assuming that there's no COVID issues. And the man says, "No, I wouldn't." Is there something wrong with what the woman asked? And is there something wrong with the way the man responded? As a woman, you might think, and maybe as a man too, but as a woman, you might think, well, she's asking, will he come to the movies with her? She didn't say it that way. She didn't say, "Hey, will you come?" She said, "Would you like to come to the movies with me tonight?" And the man, being maybe honest, says, "No, I wouldn't. There's something else. There's a ball game on I want to see, or there's some special, or I got some work to do tonight, or I'm going to play some cards with some friends. I'm going to the bar to have a drink." All kinds of possibilities. And you're honest as a man saying, "No, I wouldn't." But what if the question was asked this way? As the woman, you say, "I'd like to go to the movies tonight, and I'd like you to come with me. Will you come with me?" And the man says, "Okay." He didn't say, "I want to come to the movies." He didn't say, "I'd love to go to the movies," but you didn't ask that. You asked, "Will you come to the movies with me? I'd like company. I want to go to the movies tonight. Will you come?" And the man says, "Okay." Now, is that like a curious thing that you asked and said, "Would you like to come?" And the man said, "No." Anyway, I find that a bit amusing, because I think in a sense, women are hoping behind the words, "Would you like to come?" You understand that I want to go. That's why I'm asking you that. I want to go and I want you to come with me. And so why wouldn't you know that as a man? Well, because you're not all that thoughtful as a man about other people. Sometimes men seem to be a little more insulated in their own heads about what goes on as to whether or not they're thinking about lots of other people in the family. They tend to be thinking more about themselves. At least that's a generality. I'm not saying all men are like that. But another example, that this came from Deborah Tannen's work. This is actually researched. This wasn't just like she thought this. She actually found this to be true in a lot of research that she did. Something else that she said was, if a woman gets up while a family is sitting in a family room watching a television show, for instance, and there's a commercial, and the woman says, I'm going to get something for myself, and anybody else like something. Some people say yes, most people say no, and she says, okay, thanks. And she goes and gets something, brings something in. Half an hour later, the man gets up, walks in to the other room, brings something back for himself, never ask anybody anything. Well, why didn't you ask for me, is what other people are thinking, right? Because I asked for you. Well, I don't know. I mean, you saw me get up. If you wanted something, why didn't you say something? So anyway, those are just some really, I thought, humorous sidebars. By the way, ever since I learned that from Deborah Tannen many years ago, by the way, the book was written a long time ago. When I get up from the room and I want to go get something, I will ask anybody in the room, I'm about to get something. Would you like something? So we can learn these things. We don't have to be stuck with what's going on. And I learned when somebody says, would you like to go to the movies? It means I want to go to the movies. Would you come with me? And now I got to answer, will I come with her? Now, I may say no, but it doesn't mean I don't understand what's behind the question. The question isn't the question of would you like to come to the movies isn't whether or not I'd really like to come to the movies. The question really is, would you like to come to the movies tonight with me? Because I want you to. So Deborah Tannen's great. And I'm going to ask her, with all the changes in gender, equality issues, equity issues, has she seen some changes since she wrote the book 9 to 5? And then she's written a book called The Argument Culture, which I only recently discovered, and it was written around 2001 or something. My goodness, the woman's brilliant. I can't wait to have her on the show. And she talked about how when she first wrote that book, 9 to 5, that somebody else wrote a book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. You may remember the title. And they were both going to be on a talk show. I don't forget if it was one of the morning talk shows, with one of the CBS or ABC or somebody. And the host said, now, what is it I can ask you? He was asking Deborah Tannen. He said, what is it I can ask you that's different than what the other author is going to talk about? Because I want to see where you folks have differences that I can kind of talk about on the show. And she said, well, I don't think we really have differences. We have some different findings from our research, but they're mostly complementary. Why do you want to know about differences? And he said, because differences drive ratings. If I can get you talking and conflicting with one another, then people are going to be much happier with me because more people are going to want to watch the show if I can promote it that way. And she thought, I don't have conflict. If you want me to talk about my book, that's fine. But I don't want to just raise your ratings to come out and have some conflict with somebody I don't have any real conflict with. I don't even understand that, but I understand why the revenue stream might understand that. And so she then goes on and, several hundred pages of research background in different cultures, different places over time that, how does conflict sell? Why is it so persuasive? And why is it getting deeper and deeper? And again, since this was written, some 20 years ago, I'd like to know what are her more recent thoughts about this and whether she sees any ideas, innovations about how to get ourselves to be less driven to those kinds of shows. Is there some way we can change the culture by finding something that's equally entertaining and engaging, but isn't so negative in its outcome? So I hope you get to listen to that and get a chance to tune in to talk about that. But as long as I'm talking about women and so forth, I just want to say that I'd like to close with this last idea about women in the workplace, because I think women in the workplace, why they don't advance was an article I mentioned in the beginning that I talk a bit about. And what I'd like to say about that is that women in the workplace don't advance because men and women to a degree, seem to think that it's because of family commitments. Now, I know it's supposed to have changed, and certainly it has, at least in some instances. There are men staying at home and women having careers. There also are more accepting of the fact that there are times when people are actually sharing the workload, the family load. There's more men and women sharing the load more equally than used to happen. But there's a mentality that somehow women leave the workplace or take lesser jobs, or, not demotion so much, but like, part-time work, or they don't take that advancement because they have young family members coming on and they feel more responsible than somehow the men do. There was even something that was really troubling that I read. It was a man who was a father for the first time, and he and his wife both had high-powered careers. And what he said was disturbing. He said, when I was in the delivery room with my wife, when she delivered our baby, I got to pick the baby up and carry it into the nursery after my wife had had a chance to be with it and feed her. And I said, I felt the hormones and the chemical bonding happening to me. And I thought it was irreplaceable, and it was so amazing. And then I could understand why, for a moment, I felt like I wanted to stay home and be with this child, to be there all the time for this child, to protect and hold and love this child. And then I put the baby down, and I thought, boy, that must be what women feel all the time. And then a few weeks later, I went back to work and didn't think much about it. And I thought, he just dismissed it as if it was just like he visited the land of emotional bonding, but it wasn't for him somehow. It wasn't for him somehow. And I thought to myself, well, that's really sad. But the other thing that was really sad, I thought, was that the women who are in the workplace, the marketplace, who don't have children, also don't advance. And that maternity issue never comes up. And the women who are high-powered and don't take a lesser position because of the jobs that they want for themselves, and they go on, you hire nannies or some other people to help out, they're considered not good mothers. I mean, I actually was disturbed by this article that I read that said these things, that in today's world, and this was 2020, it was written, we haven't advanced past all of that. That's disturbing. I suspect you might find it that way too. And so one of the things that I think is really important to understand about so many of the things that I talk about is that we're not a rational world a lot of the time. Our emotions drive much of what we feel and do and think. And if we really want to make changes like helping women advance in the workplace to the highest levels, we got to change our emotional beliefs to allow for that, to encourage that. And it's not just men, it's women too that hold some of these beliefs, although it's more powerful, I think, in men. And so we really got to look deep inside ourselves to find what can we do about the feelings that have been there for a long time that we think we're making some difference with, only to find that nothing's really changed. So when we change behaviors to comply with what we think is the right thing to do, but we don't really believe it's the right thing to do, that we're still carrying around that mothers have to stay home with babies because biologically that's what's supposed to happen. I think we got to get past that, folks. Not that that's wrong or that's bad. I mean, it's wonderful when somebody wants that and it happens. But also, I think women and men both are challenged by careers in ways that are exciting, that people want to be a part of. They want to have children. They want to have a family. They want to have it all. And I think you find the balance that works in your unique setting without prejudiced beliefs that have been with us forever. So I'm encouraging people to think, how do you change the way you feel about things if you really want to make a difference? How do you change the way you feel about how you communicate around your political divide inside your own families with your friends? How do you be more open and honest and genuine and authentic and empathic? You don't just want to communicate your point of view. You want to communicate your point of view, and you want to really understand and fully appreciate the other person in your life who's your friend, your lover, your partner, your kid, your parent, you want to value them just as much as you value your own opinion. No? I encourage you to think differently. I encourage you to use this emotion roadmap to think about how you are feeling about certain things, how you want to feel, what would be more ideal to feel, and how to change to the more ideal feelings. So, hope you enjoyed the show today. It's nice to see you. I hope you want to join me on March 22nd. I hope you're around when Deborah Tannen is going to be my guest. I'm hoping it's going to be in April. And I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of the month from 12 to 1 p.m. on WPKN 89.5 FM listener-supported radio, broadcasting from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Chuck Wolf, and I hope you enjoy the show. And again, if you want to write to me, cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thanks.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.